We will be reading section 3.3 today, perception versus knowledge, and go in depth to understanding the difference between true perception and knowledge. Julie?
We have been emphasizing perception and have said very little about knowledge as yet. This is because perception must be straightened out before you can know anything. To know is to be certain. Uncertainty means that you do not know. Knowledge is power because it is certain, and certainty is strength. Perception is temporary. As an attribute of the belief in space and time, it is subject to either fear or love. Misperceptions produce fear, and true perceptions foster love, but neither brings certainty because all perception varies. That is why it is not knowledge. True perception is the basis for knowledge, but knowing is the affirmation of truth and beyond all perceptions.
Okay, so we have stages here that typically, if we assume the ego state as a starting point, if we begin there, a misperception that produces fear. The second phase of true perceptions that foster love. Our emphasis tonight is going to be on both true perception and knowledge. For true perception is the basis for returning to knowledge. It is the map, the path that this program offers, that we learn to stop misperceiving with fear, to train our mind to reach that clear slate where truth can enter in. And then this becomes the basis for knowledge. Perception must be straightened out, which we mean is we have to return to true perception before we can ever know anything. And so one of the terms that will come up synonymous with knowledge is the idea of being certain. And if you remember that image that we showed, only the meta perspective could be certain. Everything else was a interpretation of shadows on the wall. Why is this important? Because certainty is a form of true confidence and strength. It has with it a confidence in the power of one's mind. So we would call this state within human psychology, this is a transcendent state. This is not something that we expect on earth, on this side of the gates of heaven to be engaged in, but do know that the path that this program points us to is towards the final state, which is a state of knowledge. So return to knowledge or return to love. I wanted to pause there to see if there was any comments. This is really introductory at the moment. And we'll go on unless there's some comments.
Yes. Oh, come
Richard?
on.
Do you have a comment, Richard?
Yeah, I do. I just have a difficult time on this phone. I've got to do something. Anyway, can you hear me?
Yes.
That's right on with me. That's what I'm going through right now. That doesn't mean just because I know something that I will practice it. That's the challenge. And in the knowledge and perception for me, my perceptions have been way off.
Yes.
perceptions for me, I can be opinionated and I can be judgmental. And I found out over a course of time, through repetition and insight, well, I gain insight with knowledge. For me, I believe, and I may be wrong here, correct me, I'm willing to be corrected. I understand that information informs, but experience transforms.
Mhm.
So I can be book knowledgeable, but experientially, I have practiced this, and then it becomes a foundation
Mhm.
for knowledge.
Mhm.
I guess I'm trying to get you right too. I'm at a little separation here, and I'm not trying to. I but when I get to the point of knowledge, um, that's where I can be. That's where I can have my problem. I can read a book and be knowledgeable, but that's coming from the book, and not. I'm not talking about the Course in Miracles.
Yeah, so you're using knowledge in the way it's normally used,
Mhm.
Richard. But in A Course in Miracles, knowledge, we would call knowledge being the content in God's mind. It's
Mhm.
perfect knowledge. It's awareness of everything, of infinity.
Mhm.
So we're using the term here in a radical way to refer to divine knowledge, eternal knowledge, not the way it's usually used on time and earth, where you can get knowledge by going to a class.
Yeah, I'm getting that through the knowledge. The only way I can gain this knowledge is to align my will with God's will.
Yes, exactly. Very well said. Well said.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Heidi?
Okay, I have two questions. Can you just keep it very simple? Do we need to have perception before we have knowledge?
Yes.
Okay. My second question is, how can we have perception or knowledge if we just are? Like if we go into the thought of perception or knowledge,
Yeah.
isn't that ego? Like,
Yeah.
why do we even have to think about perception or knowledge? We already have what we need. We
Right.
already know what we know.
Right. Yeah, no, I hear you, Heidi. I hear you. What you're talking about is two levels there. So let's first speak about the spiritual level, Heidi. On the level of pure spirit, your spirit, which God created, is already knowledgeable, is already at the level of perfect knowledge. So there's no doubt about that. On the level of mind, now we're changing levels. On the level of mind and understanding, we know that we have been confused about any number of things. And that's where perception functions there on the level of mind. That's where error and corrections occur. And the goal of this course is to prepare our mind first by bringing it up to the level of true perception, and eventually, Heidi, to where the level of mind returns to the level of knowledge. But that would be when you enter into heaven, you will know you're there. You won't just be guessing, where am I? What am I doing here? Why me? You'll know. You'll know that you're in the right place and who you are.
So that's the knowledge and perception the book is teaching us?
The book is teaching us how to gain true perception. Okay, it's teaching us to train our minds to be vessels for true perception. Knowledge is in the future, Heidi. We really don't need to be preoccupied with it right now. but know that heaven is a state where all residents there know the truth of their being. While we're here in time and space, the best we can hope for is to innocently perceive ourselves and others with love.
Okay, so if God created us whole and perfect, he created spirit, correct?
Yes,
So I'm in heaven.
your spirit is in heaven.
So once I die, I can't realize I'm in heaven if I'm already there. I mean, once my body is gone, if God created me whole and perfect in a spirit,
Yeah.
then I'm in heaven. How am I going to realize I'm in heaven if I'm already there?
Well, your question is actually helpful, Heidi, because the issues is, will your mind understand where you are? It's not,
But so our mind is going to heaven?
so Heidi, right now, there are within your body, in the course of this class, 100 million cells in your body will die, and another 100 million cells will come into existence. You don't have to know all that, but it's true of you. When we go to heaven, we need to understand the nature of our being. We need to appreciate and love what it is that we are. And so that will require knowledge. And what we're doing here is we're putting you through intermediate school, Heidi, so
Yeah.
you'll be ready for knowledge.
I don't know why I'm so confused.
All right, so hang
Because
on,
if God created
Heidi.
perfect-
Heidi,
Yes.
how about you and I talk off at the end of class?
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right.
Okay.
That's all right. Sometimes these things happen. It's just, first we've got to get the language right, and then we've got to get concepts, and it's a learning journey.
Okay.
So hang on after class. Let's talk about these difficulties, Julie.
All your difficulties stem from the fact that you do not recognize yourself, your brother, or God. To recognize means to know again, implying that you knew before. You can see in many ways because perception involves interpretation, and this means that it is not whole or consistent. The miracle, being a way of perceiving, is not knowledge. It is the right answer to a question, but you do not question when you know. Questioning illusions is the first step in undoing them. The miracle or the right answer corrects them. Since perceptions change, their dependence on time is obvious. How you perceive at any given time determines what you do, and actions must occur in time. Knowledge is timeless because certainty is not questionable. You know when you have ceased to ask questions.
Okay, so there's a lot here. One, there are 3 phases of questioning. So let's, and it would be easy to get them confused. So let's look for a second just at the idea of questions, starting with the ego. So the ego really doesn't want to know the truth. So it's really not motivated to learn. And so it's basically wants to hang on to what it already believes. It's close-minded, and it doesn't sincerely ask questions. it might ask a question, but it doesn't really care about the answer. It's not capable of understanding truth. It would prefer to believe in the answers it's already taught itself. So we'll call that ask no questions, no sincere questions. Believe only in what the ego has taught you. Second stage applies to those who are practicing A Course in Miracles or any deep program of spirituality. You start asking questions because you realize the ego is not the authority of truth. And you start to question the things that you believed in the past. And about asking questions about the nature of reality, the mind is now open and is willing to be corrected from its false beliefs that it learned from the ego. So this is the questioning period, open-minded, willing to question long-held beliefs. And that can be not only your personal beliefs, that could be beliefs that you were taught in school, by your family, by your culture, by the nation that you identify with, asking questions. The third stage, which is really beyond our immediate concern here, enters into the realms of knowing. Again, this is the transcendent stage. A knowing mind already knows, and therefore it doesn't need to ask questions. It understands already. It would call it a certainty that is beyond questions. Okay, so that's the 3 stages. Now let's go back and look at, and throughout A Course in Miracles, you should have in mind this framework of what state am I in? What state is the passage referring to? So your difficulties stem because you don't know your being. You don't know the depth of what God created you as, and therefore don't know anything. And so that leaves us into wondering with uncertainty and asking, this leads us into the realm of perception, which is always involves an interpretation. It is not, it may appear, the ego may appear confident, but perception is always a degree of uncertainty. And miracles do not occur on that on the level of knowledge. Miracles occur on the level of perception and help to correct our minds from shifting from false perception into true perception. And so questioning illusions about yourself and the world is the first step in undoing them. And it's why we welcome questions here in this group. It's the first step. We would be remiss to not be open to questions. And it's a miracle. You would say, after believing something for 30 years, it would take a miracle to correct your mind into a new belief, particularly about the nature of what you are and your relationship to life and to others. So a miracle is the correction to false perception. And so those different levels, and so this is a journey from thinking you from ego thoughts of believing you already had an understanding to questioning all that and wanting to look at it again until and then being corrected by miracles. And finally, the final, after the last question you'll ever ask, you'll enter back into knowledge. You'll remember again what you knew when you were created by God. Okay, so let's go on.
Knowledge is timeless because certainty is not questionable. You know when you have ceased to ask questions. The questioning mind perceives itself in time and therefore looks for future answers. The closed mind believes the future and the present will be the same. This establishes a seemingly stable state that is usually an attempt to counteract an underlying fear that the future will be worse than the present. This fear inhibits the tendency to question at all.
All right, I really want to draw your attention to these last few sentences so that you might begin to watch your own mind and recognize this when it happens. So we're talking about the confused mind, the uncertain mind that is afraid. There's some fear lingering in there. It's a state of anxiety where it believes that things are not going to change. The problems I see now are going to continue into the future. This establishes what seems to be stability. Things will be the same in the future as they are today. Seems to be stable, except if the way you experience today is chaotic, then it can't be stable to be in chaos in the future. So therefore, it's necessary that we open our mind to possibilities for change, the power of your mind to choose again, to change its beliefs. And you have to do that in the presence of a fear that you don't quite understand. It's a fear that leads you to a belief. It's a fear that underscores your sense of uncertainty. Where am I going? What am I doing with this program? What's it going to do for me? There's not a lot of clarity there. And so it does require faith and trust to move forward in the presence of an uncertain future. But it's not trusting me or even trusting the words of this course. It's trusting the Creator, that the Creator is calling us back home through a path of mind training. So let's take some comments. Kathy?
So I was thinking of the word noticing, like noticing our thoughts. And I thought maybe, because like questioning, first you have to notice your thoughts. And I remember there was like this stage where I didn't even notice my thoughts until I started doing the course, let alone question them. So that's kind of what I was thinking. And then I love the slide where you had questioning and like the ego doesn't question anything and blocks everything out. And it's horrifying. I'm laughing, but it's horrifying. The ego, that's true, you know, that the ego doesn't even want to question anything at all, ever. Just goes with the status quo and likes it that way. And the other stages get us out of that. But thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. If the ego is dominating your thinking, it would just assume keep things the way they are and not raise those difficult questions that require you looking deeper. Yeah, Heidi?
So are you saying that we can only learn from fear, not love?
No. No, we're saying a starting point for the human condition is full of fear. And we need to learn to exit that state by guarding our thoughts and not returning to the familiar states of fear. That love and being in a state of peace and love is something we need to learn to do. And this comes back to boundaries. To have a boundary around the fearful state so that we don't continually return to well-rehearsed fears. So we're exiting the fearful state and entering and learning to stay in the loving state.
Okay.
Richard, you had a comment? No.
I'm really with you guys. What's coming up with me in this discussion, it's like the ego is part of a fabrication
Mhm.
where the acknowledgement is with no question. It doesn't need an answer. It's just there. And and my ego will challenge that. I can be uncertain, or what will people think if they found out I was really thinking this way? It isn't what they think, it's how I think, and not looking for the approval of others.
Right.
There was a lesson, and it stayed with me. When I first heard it, I kept challenging it. I knew there was truth there. I challenged it, but I could not. Now I can come to terms with it. Back then I couldn't. And the question was, when will the world end? And the answer was, when all is forgiven. And I can only forgive through knowledge, through truth. That knowledge is truth. And it doesn't need I don't need to qualify it. And I hope I'm on the money. If not, correct me. I don't mind.
Well, you're pointed in the right direction, Richard. That's for sure. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Noel?
Heidi's remarks earlier really struck a chord, because the eternal quandary is that we are two sentient beings. One is the ego-driven human. The other is what we want to believe and feel deeply as true, the perfect being. And this is my struggle also, negotiating between the two, so to speak. So I would appreciate more enlightenment about that. I think the earlier chapters talk about this a little bit, that, divided mind versus capital mind, human versus son, capital S. So I would appreciate any comments.
Yeah, so we are going to be dealing with this topic, Noel, again and again and again. Broadly speaking, this is level confusion, confusing spirit with mind. So that's the big topic. but the forms that that level confusion takes are many. And you cited several of them, Heidi. So, the endless questions come out of the confusion of the levels. So we will most certainly be reviewing that and talking about it. I have a detailed slide at the end of this section that I hope will be helpful. So for sure, we're not leaving this topic. All the course states truly directly, all confusion comes from confusing the levels. So we have to learn to correct that confusion in order to be clear. Otherwise, we spin in misunderstanding, and we know that's not a peaceful state. So we most certainly will be dealing with it again, not necessarily in this particular paragraph right in front of us here, but we will. Julie, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was talking with a 12-step fellow today, and was catching up about what's been going on the last couple of years, and I find myself consistently referencing time spent with all of you and with the material here, because it's been such a game changer, for my ability to be happy and to live a fulfilling life. And I was thinking, while I was talking, I had this image of like something on my forehead that, had been there all along, but I didn't realize it was there. And it wasn't something that I bought or that I made happen. It was something, to me, I had a sense that was already built inside of me, that this journey is providing a path for me to recognize. It's almost like the way that the Holy Spirit connects to me is something that I'm late to the game and finding. And please forgive the physical metaphor, because I too, sometimes get messed up in level confusion. And I was thinking about being a kid and having a solar calculator, and how fascinating it was that every time the solar calculator was in reach of the light, it worked. Even if when I had it in a room where there was no light and there was a battery in it and I pressed on, sometimes yes, sometimes no. But even on a dead battery, when I put that solar calculator in the sunlight, bada bing, bada boom, there it is. The calculator was responding because of something that was inherently built into it. It just had to get to the light. And so that's kind of how I was feeling today when I was talking with my friend.
Oh, that metaphor with the calculator is really helpful, Julie. Thank you. That was an original. Well, thank you all. I just brought in this slide. Noelle, this is kind of one way of, it's not going to work on here. All right, I'll save it for later. I'll come back to it. I was trying to do something with technology here, but it's not available at this time. Let's move on to the next paragraph. So we're going to have a real good time summarizing at the end of today, because we got a lot of material at the end that addresses questions that Heidi and Noelle have both raised.
True vision is the natural perception of spiritual sight, but it is still a correction rather than a fact. Spiritual sight is symbolic and therefore not a device for knowing. It is, however, a means of right perception, which brings it into the proper domain of the miracle. A vision of God would be a miracle rather than a revelation. The fact that perception is involved at all removes the experience from the realm of knowledge. That is why visions, however holy, do not last.
Mhm. So the state in which my prayer is that all of us are able to attain is this state of having true vision, spiritual sight, clarity of mind, clarity of mind. Spirit doesn't need additional clarity. Spirit is already perfect, but the mind does need clarity. And we'll refer to that by many names. So there's not a singular term, but all of it will contain within it the ability to understand with your soul. So we'll refer to it as innocent perception, true vision, the spiritual eye, spiritual sight, many different terms, and it will always mean that your mind is not confused about who you are and what you're here for. There's clarity. And so it's has overcome level confusion by being clear on our purpose. And that brings peace of mind because you know yourself and why you're here, what you're doing. It's a transforming in its effect. Okay, we're going to move through the reading quickly so I can get to some of the things that you all have been asking about. I'm trying to do these things in order here.
The Bible tells you to know yourself or to be certain. Certainty is always of God. When you love someone, you have perceived him as he is, and this makes it possible for you to know him. Until you first perceive him as he is, you cannot know him. While you ask questions about him, you are clearly implying that you do not know God. Certainty does not require action. When you say you are acting on the basis of knowledge, you are really confusing knowledge with perception. Knowledge provides the strength for creative thinking, but not for right doing. Perception, miracles, and doing are closely related. Knowledge is the result of revelation and induces only thought. Even in its most spiritualized form, perception only involves the body. Knowledge comes from the altar within and is timeless because it is certain. To perceive the truth is not the same as to know it.
Yeah, so there's a lot here. What shall we emphasize? Different levels. So let's get really clear on the level of mind, perceptions, and miracles and doing all are closely related because they all stem from what's in your mind. Whereas knowledge comes from a source beyond your mind. It's the result of revelation, which is a communication from God to you. Knowledge is a gift, and it does not induce action. It's confusion to say I had a revelation that I should move to North Carolina. That's not, revelation is not concerned about actions in time and space. They are solely about reestablishing communication between you and the Creator. And so there are two different orders of reality, that of knowledge of spirit, of original creation, and the perception of things, the interpretation of what's going on in the absence of knowledge, we are left with perception. Perception, even in the most spiritualized form, perception always involves the body. And so it should be clear to you right there that it's meant for moving around in time and space. It always involves the body. For those of you that already have some solid grasp of these distinctions, this last line is particularly telling, having to do with the truth. Now, by truth, let's define that briefly as being a perfect understanding as it is in heaven. Truth, perfect understanding. Well, here on earth, you can perceive the truth. For in other words, you can have in your mind an interpretation of what's true. But that's not the same as knowing the truth. Knowing the truth, the source is from your inner spiritual being. And yes, it may flash across your mind, but the source of it is deeper than the mind. The source of it is pure. It's a revelation of the mind of God. And so this is where level clarity comes in. Recognizing the difference between the state of your true being, which is never changing, and the state of your mind, which is constantly changing. And recognize clarity is being okay with that. That's the way it functions. My mind is learning and is going through change, but my spirit is eternally stable, was created perfect in union with God and creation, and that has never changed. There is no separation in spirit between you and creation. Heidi, you had a comment?
Are there cliff notes for A Course in Miracles?
Well, the answer to your question is yes, people have prepared cliff notes for A Course in Miracles.
I don't know
But-
if I'm tired, if
but-
I'm dumb. This is so complex and so complicated. Am I not here yet? Am I like being stupid? Am I letting my ego? I'm so I don't even know what's going on. I have no idea, and I'm very frustrated.
Yeah. Well, that's what happened to me when I first read it the first time and the second time. So yes, Heidi, what we're reading about and learning, your ego does not want you to understand.
Okay.
So this produces what is sometimes labeled as cognitive dissonance between the understanding that you had up until yesterday, all the things you had learned, and all of a sudden you're being smashed with a beam of truth from Holy Spirit. And that creates a cognitive state that feels like conflict between what you've always held to be true and what's being learned right now. So I'm speaking to Heidi, but this is true for everybody. You have to be willing to go through cognitive dissonance to learn A Course in Miracles. If the discomfort of cognitive dissonance is too much for you, you'll drop out of this program.
Okay.
We cannot dislodge the ego's grip over your thinking without introducing an opposite teaching, and the opposition of those two teaching systems must produce cognitive dissonance. The real question is, it's not a question of whether that'll happen, it's certain to. The real question is, what will you do when that happens? Will you take the old content of your mind and willingly and gladly turn it over to the Holy Spirit? Or, that's one choice, or will you reject the new coming ideas and cling on firmly to what you've already believed?
Okay, I've actually experienced that. I know exactly what you're saying now. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell myself that God has a plan for me. I'm exactly where I need to be and keep going. Don't drink, don't think, and attend the Courts of Miracles.
Heidi, I love the way you always come through there. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that with me. I totally am clear now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Noel?
Part of the difficulty can be how terms are used differently, like the definition of knowledge is not our usual definition of knowledge. And the other thing is that I've found many times, so many times, that reading once, twice, three times, I don't know what the hell is going on, but after a while, it sinks in a little by little. Maybe when I come back to it, like that lesson 65 you put on the screen before. I've done that 2 or 3 times, oh, I've done that, but it really struck me much, much more this time. So I say that to you, Heidi, and and myself and everyone, suspend judgment and just allow.
Beautiful. I love your summary there. Just one interjection before I take another comment. Noel referred to the language changing from the way we understood knowledge to the way it's used here. I maintain, all right, so this is really gonna, if you haven't heard this before, it is my assertion that every word in the Course of Miracles has a radical definition for it, which is not the one that you learned in the dictionary or in school. For instance, love is in Course of Miracles is not what you learned previously, nor is fear, nor is trust. In fact, if you just get this one idea, you realize every word changes. The word you, when you think of you, myself, is not what you think it is. And if we're not clear about ourselves, then how can we be clear about anything else? And this is what the questioning mind is willing to do, is willing to enter in to that domain where the things that it believed in the past are open to doubt, open to questioning. And as we learned in lesson 65, you let your mind reach a state where it starts to quiet down and you're able to receive a new idea from Holy Spirit, like a clean slate. We got to clean up the slate of our minds. Julie, you had a comment.
Yeah, I remember a couple years ago when I started with you all, I would have these times where I would imagine drawing a line down the middle of the page, and some words for me were like millipedes and centipedes. They had legs and were always moving, and they were inherently mobile types of concepts. And then what was true and what was knowledge, those static things were like a still flower. And I would say, oh, okay, so Jonica, so this word belongs in the movement column and this word belongs in the static column. And it was just helpful. You know, for example, knowledge is one of those words that doesn't have a million legs under it. It's a flower. It's done. It's finished. And so that helped me to learn the definitions, you know, because like some words now I look at them and they are millipedes and some words are not. But for me, it definitely was learning how the course is asking us to accept the knowledge that's here, because we're not being taught anything. There's no teaching. We're just accepting what is in the way that the course, you know, would offer it to us.
Nice. Julie, you just really have the metaphors today, the millipede metaphor. I love it. Of 1,000 legs. And that really is the right approach. Have a fluid sense of these words, not a rigid sense, because a rigid sense where you can lock it down and that's what it means for the next 10 years. But a fluid sense of a learner who is constantly learning to appreciate in new ways ideas that for about words that we're all heard long ago, like love, like yourself, to have a fluid sense of that. A closed mind wants to lock things down, Noel, and get a glossary definition. That's what it means, and that's all that it means forever and ever. This is much more, this will create cognitive dissonance because you're always learning. Matter of fact, Kathy and I were talking about that before we began. We're no matter how many years we've been at it, we're still at it. We're still learning. It is not fixed and rigid. It is constantly moving, and in a delightful way, by the way. Learn to embrace that, because at first it can be destabilizing, but over time, it's like a constant enlightenment. It's constant new light and clarity being added. All right, so I need to move on so that we can spend some time at the end. Julie, your go.
Right perception is necessary before God can communicate directly to his altars, which he established in his sons. There he can communicate his certainty, and his knowledge will bring peace without question. God is not a stranger to his sons, and his sons are not strangers to each other. Knowledge preceded both perception and time and will ultimately replace them. That is the real meaning of Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. And before Abraham was, I am. Perception can and must be stabilized, but knowledge is stable. Fear God and keep his commandments becomes know God and accept his certainty.
As Julie was reading that, I could not help but hear echoed in what she was reading, the idea of the millipede and the flower. Because the flower is stable, it's planted, and knowledge is stable, it's planted. But perception is mobile, it's a millipede, and it is not stable until we learn for it to be stabilized. It's a learning journey. It's the goal of this course to help to stabilize your perception. And part of that is about having boundaries so that you don't keep driving off into the darkness with no headlights and trying to find your way in a realm of the past, realms of fear and guilt and ego, not continuing to destabilize yourself by reliving the past, but instead to learn a new level of consciousness, which is called right perception, which is based on freeing yourself of the prison of the past and learning to remain in communication with the Holy Spirit, so that your thoughts, every thought that occurs, is reflected off of the wall of the Holy Spirit, and only what is light do you retain, and what is not light, you learn to just let it go and not dwell on it, because it brings you nothing. So level confusion is the realization it's only in your mind. You need to learn these things. There's nothing about your spiritual being that needs to change. But yes, we do have work in the mind to do here. And part of one of the rewards of this training is what we call right perception, and that is necessary. The word should be understood. It's a condition before God can communicate directly within your inner being, and you can receive that communication, even if for a moment, into your mind without fear. So right perception is necessary. Perception must be stabilized in order to restore open communication from God into your conscious recognition of your mind. That's the reward. When I show you the slide that we shared at the beginning, we'll go over that again. It might be a little bit more clear. This is the last paragraph, which almost introduces the next section. So we're going to take slightly new, but we're going to read it now, but we're going to cover it again when we go over the next section tomorrow. Julie?
If you attack error in another, you will hurt yourself. You cannot know your brother when you attack him. Attack is always made upon a stranger. You are making him a stranger by misperceiving him, and so you cannot know him. It is because you have made him a stranger that you are afraid of him. Perceive him correctly so that you can know him. There are no strangers in God's creation. To create as he created, you can create only what you know, and therefore accept as yours. God knows his children with perfect certainty. He created them by knowing them. He recognizes them perfectly. When they do not recognize each other, they do not recognize him.
So if you view another person as a stranger, then that means you are a stranger unto yourself. Let me say it another way. If you view another person as estranged or a stranger, that means your spiritual being, who you truly are, has become estranged from your consciousness. You have level conflict. your mind doesn't know your recognize your spiritual being. And that confusion gets projected outwards onto other people, and you view them as separate from you, as a stranger, having nothing to do with you. It's a byproduct of an internal conflicted state. We'll cover this more on our next section. I really want to move into what is a summary. We're moving, so we finished the reading for this section, but we're moving into a summary. And hopefully this will tie things together. There are 3 fundamental states of consciousness in A Course in Miracles, and each one has a different experience associated with it, with a different state of consciousness. And we didn't know that. We weren't taught that. So we need mind training that will teach us where we can learn to set boundaries around these different states so that we don't continue to enter into the dark state. Don't continue to enter into darkness. It's essential that you learn to free yourself from fear and not keep re-entering into it again and again and again. This was what chapter 2 was all about. It is essential that you learn to recognize fear when it rises in your mind, and learn, first of all, to immediately stop and don't go any further into it. And then eventually you learn to, every time it arises, that that's not what you want to entertain with your mind. You become sensitized to it, just as you would if you started to go near a ledge that you could fall off of. You would be very aware that you're in the danger of getting too close to a ledge. I was thinking about the Grand Canyon when I was saying that. So this process of learning to stay out of fear and in the right perception is a transition in your sense of self from a self-deceptive worldview into one that is self-aware. This is mind training. From self-deception to self-awareness. You can say it many ways, from spiritual blindness to clarity and spiritual sight. And the Course in Miracles tells us how. True perception becomes the essential pathway and ultimately will take us back to knowledge, but we really have to work on the true perception right now. And we also talked today about understanding the role of questions, how the ego wants to keep things the way they are and keep a closed mind, believing the future is the same as the past, whereas the healing mind learns to question those things that the ego has assured us of, learns, and it begins with questioning symbols such as Heidi and Noel and Julie referred to today. Oh, those words don't mean what I thought they meant. You're starting to question what is love? Question, who am I really? What really am I? It's a basic existential question. What am I doing here in this life? What is my purpose, my function? What is my relationship to everybody else? These are fundamental questions, and the healing mind, once it begins, it opens up to a whole array of questions. So Heidi, this is not a simplified version, but this is the big picture. All right. We're not holding anything back here. There's not anything else. There are, and this is an attempt to explain the levels. So we all know already that there's a level, a spirit level that seems beyond our current understanding, but yet the truth is it's a part of our being, the spirit level. We also know that there's a material level that our bodies are in, that our eyes and ears and senses tell us all about, a material level. And in between that is the level of mind. And in the separation, all these things started to split apart, and we no longer had knowledge of the levels. Instead, we became confused. And that introduced many levels, Heidi, into the mind. And this is where all confusion comes from, including what goes on in your conscious mind. Your conscious mind is constantly receiving information from above, from the Holy Spirit. She's always there and ready to help. It is also receiving information from below, from your memories of the past, from all the things that haunt you and trouble you. And so both messages are coming in your conscious mind, and choices are necessary in that field of your conscious mind. And this is what requires mind training. Little did you know that you have choices, and your choices have implications for you. Obviously, whether you entertain love or entertain fear has implications for how you're going to experience any given situation. So the levels of confusion, of which we're not going over all these levels just right now, we've done this before, all operate here in the mind, and this is what mind training is all about. Ultimately, we hope to return the mind to a state of innocence where you're no longer haunted by conflicts from the past, but there is no blame. There's no blame for the blameless, for the innocent mind. There's no feeling of guilt, and the mind is free to live in the present, to accept things as they are, to perceive spirit as it is, without filtering it through ego concepts of the past. I had one more thing that I wanted. Yeah, there it is, slide 2. So our topic for today was perception versus knowledge. And so this is the main concept for today is, and we talked about knowledge, we talked about false perception, and we talked about true perception. And the intention of this program is, well, to take you from a state where you didn't realize the difference between false perception and true perception. You equally entertained all thoughts and feelings that entered into your consciousness with no discrimination. To train your mind to make a distinction between hell and heaven in your mind, between guilt and innocence, between fear and love, to make a distinction. And furthermore, so that's step one, is to make a distinction. And furthermore, to actively and willingly choose love and reject fear. And if, as you do that, and make a habit of that, using the workbook lessons as your guidebook, you will more and more acquire a mind of true perception. You'll be perceiving the truth, and that will lead to insights into the nature of your spiritual being. So, Noel, this is your mind starting to become aware that you have a spirit being within you that is perfect, a spiritual insight, and you begin to appreciate that, not fearing it like a ghost spirit, but embracing it as the truth of your being. And that prepares your mind for a gift from heaven called revelation, an experience of, it's called a communication, but it's not communication the way you would define it in the past. It's a flash of understanding to your mind where you experience the truth directly without any filters. It requires that you be free of fear in order to do that. And in that moment, you experience a knowing state. It's like you're brought back home again, and I mean spiritual, eternal home. It's for a moment you're reconnected with your origins, your perfect state, and it flashes across your mind like a movie from heaven. And we're not saying this lasts. This goes on for however long. And then typically what happens is we then fall out of it and become preoccupied with the ordinary things of life. But having visited there reassures you that you had the experience and that this is the truth of your being. So that's as far as we're going to go tonight. We have some more time, so we're not going to read anymore, and we're actually concluding the formal part of our class for tonight. I know there are perhaps some confusions earlier, and I'm more than happy to hang on for those of you who would like to supplement what we already learned with a little bit more, if we can do so. So I want to thank Julie for being our reader tonight. And I want to thank all of you for your questions and your thoughts. If you're questioning these things, you could be certain there are other people in the group that are asking these questions. These are classic questions. After all, we are raising everything you ever learned to doubt and introducing the Holy Spirit's perspective on these ideas. So it's a great learning. It certainly is going to lead to many more questions to come. And so your questions are always welcome. And thank you all, and many blessings. Namaste.
Thank you. Namaste. Namaste. Thank you.
Heidi, are you clear on the things that you Or,
I'm extremely clear and happy.
great.
I really am. I am.
All right, and we'll have to talk this week. I want to find out about how things went, but we
Yeah,
can do,
perfect.
we do
Actually,
that.
I won't know anything till Wednesday.